Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Stitching Tales. I am Johanna Lundström, the author of several sewing books, including Sewing Activewear, Master the Cover Stitch Machine, and Fit for Knits. And I also have my own sewing pattern line, and I'm also a YouTuber under the name The Last Stitch.
My name is Malena Hjerpe. I'm a freelance pattern maker, and I also create my own PDF pattern under the name Hazelhen Patterns.
And in today's episode, we have a topic that is actually one of the most searched for on my YouTube channel, which is how to hem knits, because that is definitely a topic that is quite challenging sometimes, also depending on your machine and your experience. So we're definitely going to go really deep into this topic in this episode. So I think you will learn a lot of really useful information, regardless if you only have a sewing machine, if you have a serger, or perhaps even a cover stitch machine. So that is one of what we are talking about today. But before we do that, I thought it would be nice to do a little bit of a catch-up, because as always, some things are going on in our lives as well. So Malena, I know that you have some exciting things to share.
Yeah, Tauko Magazine is finally released, and when we release this podcast, it's the magazine was released last week then. So that I'm super excited about. I haven't received a copy of it yet myself, so I'm really looking forward to actually to see it and, you know, flip through all the pages and look at all the nice things. There are so many nice garments in this issue, I think. The topic is, or a theme is denim, so I'm wearing a denim shirt just in honor of that. And it also has been so nice to see. I have a design there called Nipita Dress, and when they launch a magazine, they also have like a community that picks out the different styles, and they make samples of them and share on Instagram. And I've seen several samples from this community makes. Ooh. And it's just so nice to see when people have what they have made and how they have interpreted it and made it into their own style, and it's so nice. It's I love it. And the thing is, like, if you sew, then you should of course make it into your own. One, for example, had hacked it and made it into a blouse, just made it shorter. I mean, that's like super easy hack. So even though it is a dress, I mean, you obviously should do whatever you feel like, make it into your own. So it's been so nice to see, and I will, if you head to my Instagram, Hazelhen Patterns, I have definitely shared them. So yeah, that is super happy about it.
Yeah, that's so cool. And we're definitely going to post something on Stitching Tales pod as well for this episode, because you want to see more pictures. And it's such a great pattern, because it's one of those patterns that will work for pretty much anyone as well. And, you know, it has some really beautiful details, and it has pockets, but it's still like really easy to sew, right? Yeah. So I love that kind of mix between, you know, having a distinct style and still being very accessible. And you can, as you say, you can definitely do it your own, and the details with the pleat in the front and the cuffs and the yoke in the back. So yeah, it's a really great pattern, and I'm very, very excited, because, you know, this has been a long process. Nice to because we have been like hinted about it a couple of times, but it's such a long process, right? Because this happened maybe almost a year ago, I think, when you first submitted this style, right?
Yeah, exactly, because they have like I think it is twice a year you can apply for being part of the magazine. And I don't remember exactly when that was. I think it was in the beginning of last year, I think. And I submitted my pattern when I was selected. I sent them, I think it was like in May or something. So it's I mean, it's been a while in the process. I mean, obviously, because they need to create the photo shoot and everything, so it's a lot of work behind every magazine. So yeah, it was a while since started this project. And I can really recommend it to everyone who is interested that, if you want to submit a design, they have, I think it is twice a year, and they release 4 issues a year. So you can send them a design, and you don't even have to send them a pattern. You can also just send them a design vision, and they create the pattern as well. So it's like such an amazing service. And also just the fact that, I mean, I know the pace that I'm working in when I release my PDF pattern, very slow, but that they are able to release 4 issues every single year. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing. And when you look at the Tauko Magazine, like the editorial staff, they're not that many people. I mean, it's not like a huge staff. And I think, again, that goes to show, I guess they have a really nice streamlined process because they've done this for a couple of years now, which, goes back to what we talk about, getting the process right. And when you keep doing it repeatedly, it gets so much easier. Whereas, you and I who release sewing patterns, with slightly
whenever
more
we have time to do it
in between, because we usually we cannot like benefit from the flow because it can be a year or two or more between every pattern, so the workflow is a little less like efficient.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah.
A little bit, yeah. But once we get going, we do finish stuff. So yeah, but
yeah, true. Yeah, no. So it's really we're gonna definitely give links in our show notes to where you can buy the magazine, and also you can also, if you don't want to buy the actual magazine, you can also just buy the 1 or 2 like PDF patterns also from their website. So it's like such a value for money, the magazine, because there are a lot of patterns in there.
Yeah, very, very nice. It's such a nice way of doing like an updated version of the traditional pattern magazine, which has been, I honestly think, I've seen, in old like vintage bookshop, I think pattern magazine has been around for like 100 years at least. So it's pretty insane to think about. And it's so nice to see that they can still like revitalize that kind of, because everything is now digital, but it's so nice to see and hold, you can actually see the patterns like that and not just on the computer. But you can also get a digital version of the magazine, right? You can get like an digital as well.
I think so, and you can have subscriptions to it as well, or as I said, just buy one PDF pattern if you want. So they have great like different options, whatever you want to do. But that's my exciting news. What are your exciting news? How is it going at your side?
Yeah, it's going really well actually.
Speaking of denim.
Speaking of denim, yeah. Speaking of long-term projects, which we are both experts in. Loyal listeners of this podcast have heard me talk about my famous jeans sewing course, and I am very happy to say that I am, this week as we speak, I will do the final editing of the actual course. I have a few bits like a presentation and stuff like that to do, but I am happy to say that by the end of January, the jeans sewing course will be pretty much done.
Lovely.
Yes. It's been like a mammoth undertaking, and I filmed it this summer, and then I took a break, and then I've been working relentlessly for about 2 months, editing almost every single day. Yeah. So it's been a really, but the work process has actually been quite nice, and I'm so proud of this course. I mean, I feel confident saying that this sewing course is extremely in-depth, but still in a very efficient way. If you're familiar with my teaching styles, I use a lot of graphics, I go straight to the point, I'm very visual, and I give you lots of like insider pro tips. So even if you already have my sewing jeans book, I think you will be really, really helped by this. Also, it makes a difference, I think, from seeing in still images or watching. I also have several tutorials on YouTube, but this production level, everything is very elevated in this course, and I've spent so much time on every minute to make sure that it's so to the point, and I feel really, really proud of what I've done, and I feel this is something I can definitely feel like I offer something really spectacular. I will say that this is a safe space for grandiosity.
We are all cheering you on.
Thank you. That's also why it's taken me so much time, because I definitely want to make sure that this is a top level production in every single frame. So if you're curious about the jeans course, you can, if you're already on my newsletter email list, you will get a nice early bird offer in a couple of weeks here from recording this podcast. And if you're not part of my email list, you can sign up on theloststitch.com. You can go to my homepage. There's a box where you can fill out your email address. And I will also link to that in the show notes if you want to sign up. So you definitely should do that. If you're curious about the jeans course and want to see more behind the scenes, definitely sign up and also get a nice early bird offer before I release the course. So yeah. Feels good.
Finally. How long have you had this in your mind? Like, when did you first get the idea? Like, how like mentally, how long have you been working on this?
I think about 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Finally.
And, finally. Yeah. Because I have this like a board. It's an app called Trello. It's like a project managing app where I dump all my ideas for future projects, and then I set them on a timeline for each year. So it's nice, and I keep, of course, moving those to next year, because that's how I roll. But I think if I go back and see that I started to outline this in 2021, so I think it's about 4 years.
That's great to be able to put the check done
mark. yeah I always feel so good, and it's so nice because even though I sew a lot of jeans and I've written a book about sewing jeans, I was still just making this course. I have had a few more like realizations of ways of sewing it even better and more efficient. So that's why I'm really excited as well, because I feel like I've also elevated my own sewing, and that's why I'm also so excited to share, because I think you're gonna really like you're gonna be really like, wow, I didn't know you could do it like that. So we have lots of those little extra tricks. So I'm very excited to share. Yeah,
that's a benefit of things need to take its time. Like, you can't rush it, because if you get the idea and you do it right away, maybe as you say, in a couple of years when you have done it even further, learned even more, like, things need to mature sometimes before it's ready to be released. So it's I'm trying to pep up myself, like, why it's okay for us to take so long time to from idea to finished product.
Yeah, but it is. I mean, when we did Fit for Knits, I think that was a 2-year process, and I think that was also really helpful, because we had lots of like ideas and developments, and we revisited a few things and made them more clear. So I think that if you don't rush a project, I think the end result will be better, and ultimately that will gain the recipient of what we do, because we have put so much thought into this. So to me, it's like a quality assurance process in a way. I try this again. We are trying to like explain why we work slow. That, and the fact that we also have other jobs that we do.
Yeah, we do other things as well. I think that's a main issue why our pace is maybe not always so quick enough. I would say efficient when we actually do the work, but the time before we actually get to do it, that's a little bit more time consuming.
Yeah. So that was a little bit of an update. So check out Malena's new pattern. And of course, sign up for my list if you want to learn more about my upcoming course about how to sew your own jeans. All right then, should we tackle this week's subject, how to hem knit garments?
We have talked about this briefly, I mean, in previous episode when sewing t-shirts, but we thought that this deserves its own episode, maybe even further episodes, because there are so many things you can do here, so many things that could go wrong, and as you said, like, this is one of the most searched topics on your YouTube channel, and I guess on your blog as well.
Yep.
So people are wondering how to do it in the best way.
Yeah, and why would you say that people do struggle with this and search so much? Why are the challenges with hemming knits compared to, say, a woven fabric that, it's perhaps less searched for and provides less challenges?
The stretch. It's the best thing about knit, and it's the absolute worst thing about knit. And this seam in particular, it's so visible, so it needs to look right. You can't hide it, like as the seam allowance are hidden inside the garment. This one is so visible, so it's so easily to see if it doesn't look right. The technical sewing, it is trickier. The machines are a little bit more they don't always sew a nice seam, and also, as I said, the stretch. A knitted fabric almost always is the most stretch on like the horizontal way, and you sew in that direction. So you sew a seam that are maybe stiffer compared to the fabric stretch, and that creates issues. So that's why it's so much more difficult to hem a knitted garment compared to a woven. A woven you can basically just fold and sew a straight seam and you're done. It's more or less that easy. But you can't do that. If you would do that on a knitted garment, the seam would crack, break when the fabric is stretched out. So you can't do it. Interesting now with you, as we talked about in the last episode with this stretch. Yeah,
I'm holding up now the stretch thread.
Thread. Yeah, that. I'm interested. I'm interested in it.
Yeah, I'm also interested. And as what I'm holding up now, if you're not watching the video version, but you can watch the video version on Stitching Tales Pod on YouTube. This is a stretch thread from Metler. So it has a little bit. I'm pulling it here. As you can see, it has pretty good elastic. Substantial elastic, I would think. And I've done some experiments, but I have yet to sew a straight stitch crosswise, and I'm not sure I would recommend that ever.
No, to be honest, I don't think so.
But
either.
if you need to sew, for instance, a dart or something like that, this could be the secret ingredients to make sure that the seam doesn't pop, because that is the main problem, right? If you sew a straight stitch, as soon as you, unless your knit fabric has zero stretch, which isn't the most common trait on a knit fabric, you're gonna run into issues. I guess I would say if you had like a really loose fitting stable sweatshirt fabric, maybe you could use a straight stitch, but also important to know that you definitely need to shorten the stitch length a little bit, because why, Malena, is it important to also consider stitch length when
the shorter the stitch length, the stretchier it is, like, because it goes basically up and down so much in the fabric, so that also creates a little bit of volume, or like it creates more
thread that can be pulled.
Exactly.
It's like a coil. I like to use the coil of a cymbal, because if you have a coil that has I think it's a spring is probably the right word, and then it has coils. So if you have a spring that has lots of coils, you can like pull it out and then it will bounce back. So that's kind of the same thing, right? The thread works in a similar manner like all these coils. So the more coils you have, the more it can expand. Of course, there's always something that is of too short stitch length. You're going to have feeding issues, and it's not going to be a beautiful seam. However, you definitely should, compared to, say, a woven, where when you top stitch or top stitch denim, for instance, have a pair of jeans, you definitely want a longer stitch length because it looks nice. But that's not the way to do it if you would try to use a straight stitch. And that goes for, any type of hemming that you need to consider, having more insertion points, or I guess that's kind of explanation of how it works.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that the stretch thread, as you said, like, for example, a Ponte di Roma, then maybe it would be like workable to just have a straight stitch with that thread, and also to use it, for example, if you have a twin needle, because if you use a twin needle, the under thread will be zigzag, so it will have a little bit of a stretch, but not so much, to be honest. But if you have that combined with a stretch thread, that might actually work pretty well. So if anyone has done that already, give us, write us a comment. We are so curious to see what your opinion about it, because it's a really great invention, this stretch thread. It's sounds interesting, intriguing.
Yeah, very much. And also, if you only have a sewing machine, and getting sewing machines is really expensive. I mean, a serger and a cover stitch machine is really high budget investments, especially if you want to get a good machine. So the more you would be able to do with your regular sewing machine, the better, I think. And also, you save a lot of space not having to have 3 sewing machines as I do on my table.
True.
Yeah, so that's a good basic explanation of why it is a struggle to hem knits to start with. So I guess we could move on to talk a little bit, because you have, there are 3 options when it comes to domestic sewing machines, and I guess we could start with the sewing machine. So you mentioned twin needle, and twin needle is, if you're not familiar with it, it's a needle that has two needles, and it's held together with a little piece of plastic, and it sews 2 parallel rows, and I'm holding up one now if you're watching the video version for knits. And the thing is, on the outside where you sew, you're going to get 2 rows of straight stitch, and it mimics what is known as the cover stitch, or in a cover stitch machine. The difference is, of course, as Malena mentioned, on the reverse side you will have a zigzag stitch, and the zigzag stitch is what provides the stretch. So this is a good starting options if you only have a regular sewing machine, because you get a neat outside at least, and you also do get some stretch. So that is definitely worth trying. Again, this will work better on more slightly not the thinnest knits and not the stretchiest knits, because as you said, Malena, the twin needle do have less stretch than a properly set up cover stitch. So if you're making a really figure-fitting t-shirt with negative ease, you definitely need to, again, experiment with the stitch length and do a pull test and see. Another problem that you will likely encounter, if that's a thing you are concerned about, is what is referred to as tunneling. Do you know what I refer to, Malena?
Yeah. We talked about this in previous episode also, that the fabric in between those seams are pulling together, creates a little bit of a tunnel. Very common, unfortunately, when you have a twin needle, and especially if you sew with more softer knitted fabric, that is a very common issue. And the Rebel has no problem with adjusting the tension on the bobbin. That's my go-to solution for this. A little bit looser tension, and it will work magic for this problem.
That's a very good tip. I'm a little more hesitant. So my solution is that I have 2 bobbins. I have one that I trust my sewing machine repair person to set up for me, and then the other one I can go crazy. But that's a very good point. And also, don't be obsessed, because when you start mixing with the tension, you will have the below side of the zigzag stitch. Because normally we will talk about, we need to have balanced tension and everything like that. You should not see the needle thread on the reverse side, and you don't want the bobbin thread to peek through on the right side. But I've found when it comes to manipulating with the tension, that sometimes it might not look the most pretty on the reverse side in order to get the best result when it comes to, as you say, prevent tunneling and get good stretch. So sometimes, don't be obsessed about that kind of stuff. It doesn't have to look as pretty on the reverse side, in my opinion, when you do a twin needle.
Yeah, if you see all the issues, you're standing too close. Skip stitches are also very common, unfortunately, with the twin needle. And I think there are different types of twin needles, both for woven fabric and for stretch fabric. So just make sure that you have a stretch needle, that like a ballpoint needle, that will help prevent the skipped stitchings. But yeah, it's a little bit not my favorite hemming method, to be honest. It's a great starting point if you are first trying it out, try to hem knits, but it is a little bit not maybe the most perfect one. Having a zigzag as hem seam is perfectly fine as well. That could actually be a really nice detail also, and that usually is a little bit more not so, how do you say, skip stitches and those kind of things. It's not as sensitive, so maybe a zigzag could actually work better than a twin needle in some cases.
Yeah, and also the benefit of the zigzag stitch, especially if you So again, don't use a too wide of too long of a stitch length. That you again make sure that the zigzag is a little bit narrow. We can definitely, and also a little bit wider. So again, that you have more thread. So I think if, say for instance, if you would sew, I mean, like a tight-fitting top, or like leotard, or like swimsuit, that kind of stuff, where it's going to be so stretched out. I think I would generally say that opting for a zigzag stitch is probably better than using a twin needle in my experience.
And the funny thing, like I think we home sewists have a little bit of a feeling, or maybe I'm speaking for myself now, that zigzag stitch looks a bit homemade. Like that's why we are a little bit like, I don't want to use that stitch when it's visible. But then I started to look at my underwear, for example, or as you say, swimsuits, and they often have a zigzag stitch as the visual seam, because it is more stretchy. So yeah, don't be afraid of using it. It could be really good. And regardless of what type of needle or seam you are using, prepping the hem, I think it is so crucial to get a nice result. I always fold, or I always press the hem before I start sewing. And one really crucial area is when you sew over the seam line, the seam allowance, because then it's like so thick compared to it's 2 layers when you sew the regular hem, and then you come to the seam allowance, and then it's just like so many, it creates a bump, and that will be really tricky for your machine to sew over. So the fabric will be stretched out when the feet are like pulling the fabric. So we show this in our book Fit for Knits. We snip the seam allowance, not all the way to the, how do you say? You don't want to have a hole.
Seam. You don't want to cut into the seam. Just a tiny snip. And
basically
you can
half
also just,
the overlock seam or something.
And you could also just try to finger press the fold if you don't want to cut anything. Well. We show both methods in our book.
Yeah, but so they are in opposite direction at the folded hem. So when you sew over it, you don't have to sew both the seam allowance in one step, like you spread out the thickness basically a bit. Those two things, having the hem pre-pressed and doing that to the side seam, it makes a huge difference, to be honest. And if you hemming the sleeve, pre-press it before you even sew the side seam. You can do that on the bottom of the top as well. Because it's just gonna be so much easier when you press it to have it flat on the ironing board. So that I really, really recommend. Don't skip these steps.
No, very, 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 very important. Very good tip about that pre-pressing as well, and especially if you're pretty confident that the length will be right on the sleeves and the bodies, and you as you say, you can do it on the hem as well, because it just gets so much easier. Everything when you have to do something with seams already sewn, it's going to be more of a challenge, of course, as you say, especially with a narrow sleeve hem. It's like night and day. It's so hard. It's also really easy that when you have that, when you start pressing, you have to pull, so you run the risk of actually like stretching out the hem before you even sewn, which you, as you mentioned in the introduction, Malena, which is one of the problems as well. It is tricky because the fabric stretches. So minimizing all those like risks along the way just ensures you will have much more control over it. And
you don't need pins almost. Like I just have very few pins since it keeps in place when it's pressed. So maybe just like 2 pins per side or something, so it's really it's so much help.
I agree, because the only thing really that matters is to ensure, of course, that the seams, the side seams, they will align when you fold them up, and that that the fabric doesn't shift during sewing. Which brings us to perhaps one of the challenges of using a regular sewing machine is if you have the reason why it's so popular to have a serger. One of the reasons why it's so popular to have a serger and a cover stitch machine, and a cover stitch machine, for you who are not familiar, that is the professional way of hemming. It looks like a twin needle stitch on the right side, it has 1, 2, or 3 straight rows, depending on what stitch you use, and on the other reverse side there is a chain or a loop, so it has an enormous amount of stretch compared to a regular twin needle. And another benefit of using a serger or a cover stitch machine is something that is called differential feed. So it has a lever or a knob where you can regulate the speed of the feed dogs, and this will prevent what is quite common, as you said, Malena, knit stretch, especially if you're using soft knits with a lot of stretch. There's a risk of the hem expanding during sewing with a regular sewing machine, because that doesn't have the differential feature. So if that is an issue, and it will probably be if you're sewing, say, with soft jersey, you will run into these kind of problems. I mean, regardless of how experienced you are, it is, because it's not really meant. A sewing machine wasn't invented to hem knits. So we're working against that right now. So we're not saying this is the best machine. We're trying to say, how can you work around the fact that you're using a machine that isn't designed to sew with knits? And Malena, you have a great tip regarding sewing machine, which I unfortunately don't have on my sewing machine, but it is to adjust the pressure foot pressure, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because if it is too high pressure, like it pushes down the fabric too much, the feed dogs are going to be pulling the fabric, and it's just going to be pulling more compared to how much, I mean, the fabric is going to stay still and it just gets pulled out. So then you're going to have a really like wavy seam. Pressing afterwards as well with a lot of steam can help. You should do that anyway, because it does wonders to your hem. The fabric basically like recovers so much when you're using steam afterwards. But I mean, it can't do miracles. So if the seam is stretched out, it is difficult to avoid. So I usually have a little bit less pressure on the presser foot, just so it doesn't push it down too much. And here you can also try with, I think it's pretty common to have a Teflon foot as like a standard, like they come with your machine. And you have a walking foot as well. I have never tried that. So what I'm holding up now for you watching the video version of this is a walking foot, and I think most sewing machine brands has this. Unfortunately, this is not normally included in your presser foot kit, so you have to buy this separately. Sometimes you can get generic that fit, because they're quite pricey. Mine is from Bernina Original. And why use a walking foot? Well, the walking foot it compensates for this like feed indifference, as you mentioned, Malena, because if you sew, because of you're not able to regulate the speed of the upper layer of the knit fabric will kind of push forward, so you will get like almost like drag lines as well. It just isn't that it stretches out, it also might like move uneven. It will have a tendency of pulling the outer layer, so then you get those twists, which are also a little bit annoying. The walking foot, the mechanic of that, and you can use this for a twin needle, and I've tried it with great result, is because of the walking foot, it pulls the fabric back, the upper layer, so you don't get that pushing forward, which is so annoying when you're using a regular sewing machine. So this is like kind of a hack as well. Just like using presser foot pressure, a walking foot can also help with this, and maybe a combination as well, who knows. And another, if you don't have either the opportunity to adjust the presser foot pressure, although sewing machine doesn't always have that, or you don't have the budget to get a walking foot, I have an easy way of doing this, and I will also link to a video on the show notes here where I show this method. So what I'm holding up now is an awl, which is a sharp tool that you can use to pierce hole, but any type of like narrow tool, whatever you have, it can be pretty much anything. So what you do is when you sew is that you gently pull the upper layer of the fabric towards the presser foot in a rhythmic motion, and that prevents actually the fabric from being pushed forward. So it's a little bit like it requires slow sewing because you have to be careful, but and you can use this on woven fabrics. For instance, if you're sewing silk, you might encounter this as well, where you get drag lines because the fabric gets twisted when you do like a hem.
you can use this tool with the same result to get really nice flat hem. So all great investment for this as well. You also have a few other options. One way is, of course, to use like a washable stabilizer. What I'm holding in my hand now is something called Wonder Tape, which is a double-sided tape that you can like glue together the hem fold, and then you stitch, and then when you wash the fabric, it disappears. But then you need to wash the fabric before you iron, because you don't want to melt the glue. You can also use a regular glue stick as well to get a similar result. And now this is definitely like high level techniques, but I mean sometimes you need to like really do try. If you only have a sewing machine, you might be prepared to go outside normal sewing techniques, because as I said, you're working with a lot of challenges, so it's you have to like hack the system in a way. That's why we share a few more like unconventional method here, because it's going to be hard. It's not an easy thing.
Yeah, one thing you mentioned, go slow. Like, don't rush this. It's okay to really go slow on these types of seam, because that will actually help. It will be so beneficial to walk slow, and you will be able to also just push forward the top layer of the fabric a little bit with your fingers. It's gonna be so much easier. And the drag lines that you're talking about, like the snagging drag lines, so annoying and so easily happening on knitted fabric, especially on softer fabric. Here it's a good thing to think about the design of the hem. I know some t-shirts are very like rounded at the hem, which is really nice looking, but the more curve the seam has, the more trickier it is going to be in those curves to get a nice hem without those snagging drag lines. So if it is a really tricky fabric, maybe just consider to have a straight hem instead of any curved or shapes. Yeah,
that's a very good point. It's very the deeper the curve, the more likely you will get those drag lines, and also if you have a very like deep curve, you definitely need to also have a more narrow seam allowance, and that goes regardless if you're doing woven or knit.
Yeah, and the tricky part with the narrow seam allowance or hem allowance here is it gets a little trickier to. The more narrow it is, the more easier it is to be stretched out, and it's a little bit easier to work with a wider hem. We actually got a question for our previous Q&A episode that we can very suitable here. How can I stop the hem on my t-shirt from flipping up and showing the underside? And I think here it could be sorry. Maybe an issue that I don't know how the hem looks here. If you want to send a picture, that would be great. It maybe is a little bit too narrow, so then it folds up very easily. Or if it could be some tension issue, I think. If like the upper thread, I suspect, is then a little bit too tight, so it pulls together, and then the bottom is like lifting up. Could be something like that. Or if this is a personal preference, but if you have a twin needle or flat lock or whatever, to have the wider stitch width, like the distance between those two rows are a little bit wider, then it's also going to help the hem to be flat. If it's really tight in between the seams, it's not going to be as stable and also less stretchy. So I prefer to have it a little bit wider compared to those just like a few millimeters apart.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And usually what I'm holding in my hand now is a twin needle force stretch, and it does come in two different widths. So that can also be something to consider. Because it is tricky, and you bring up a good point there. So I'm curious, Malena, what would you say would be a good standard hem allowance for, say, hemming a knit top or a knit t-shirt? What would you say would be a good hem allowance?
I usually do 2 centimeters or 2.5, like 1 inch around there. If it is curved, might work might be a little bit less, and then if it's just straight, you can go wider as well. Then it's just more of a design feature, how wide you want it. But I think that's a pretty common, pretty standard width of the or height of the hem allowance.
Yeah, that's a good point. And also another trick that we didn't mention, but if you have a sewing machine and a serger, one thing you could do to get a really nice finish is that you first serge the edges of the t-shirt that you're sewing. So using a wide 3-thread overlock stitch. And you can also, what I do sometimes when I have issues or suspect that I can increase the differential feed a little bit when I'm overcasting the hem on the serger, because that will keep the fabric pulling together just slightly, because that can also mitigate a little bit of the issues that compensate for the stretch out risk. And also the thing is, if you use matching thread for the overlock and then when you sew the twin needle over it, it's going to look like it's made with a cover stitch, because you get that nice loop finish on the reverse side, and it will hide the zigzag stitch, which unfortunately is not as sightly as a serged or a cover stitched reverse side. So I actually do that a lot when I'm using my sewing machine to hem. I usually serge the edges first, actually, because I just like how neat it looks, and it gives a better finish.
And I think the overlock seam, I think it gives a little bit more stability also. If you sew the twin needle on top of it, it helps prevent the tunneling, as you talked, and it gives a little bit more of a stability also, I think, to the fabric. So I don't think it's just a visual benefit. It could be something technical there as well.
Yeah, you're right. I didn't think about that, but that's very true. And that brings me to another point, which I also forgot, that I also get questions about, and I'm sure you do as well sometimes. What do you do when you have knit fabrics that are curly in the edge, especially like lightweight jersey? They have a tendency, when they cut, they start to curl. And that's also going to cause some headache when you're hemming. I mean, obviously, one, as you say, is that you should press before, that can flatten it out. But I've actually noticed despite my best effort in pressing, some very lightweight jersey, they just want to curl as soon as you push the iron away from it. Yeah, I hate sewing with those. So annoying. So my advice when people ask that, I say, don't sew it. Don't sew those. Sorry, but to bring this point home, as you said, if you serge the edges again, curling problem fixed.
Yeah, it will curl so much less if you have. And some fabrics, to be honest, if it's really light, stretchy jersey, twin needle, it's not going to work. It's just too. It's not compatible. They are not compatible. So then again, you need to work with the design, with the maybe make a, what do you call it? Lettuce hem.
Lettuce hem, yeah.
Lettuce hem, yeah. When you overlock it, but it actually stretches it out like extremely a lot. So the seam is actually very wavy. I know Sanna has done really nice samples of that on her honey girl tee, I think it's called. On her samples, Paradise Patterns, I can see if I can find some photos there. Looks really nice. And then like the problematic issues of the knitted fabric becomes a design feature instead. So try to work with the fabric instead of against it. Because I would never use a twin needle on like those really slippery, soft knits.
No. Yeah.
And the funny thing is, like, you always say that, but just adjust the differential feed on your overlocker. That to me is like the same resistance you have to adjusting the bobbin tension. I'm like, I don't want to touch my overlocker. I don't want to no. I know I can, but I don't want to do. I'm so reluctant to do that. So we all have our issues.
Yeah. It's like, welcome to the Sewing Neurosis podcast.
Yeah, it's good we are two people here, so sometimes listen to Johanna, don't listen to me, and then vice versa. So yeah. But I think I never adjust it. But then again, I have not sewn those kind of seams either, where you really have benefits of them. So, but yeah, those are my like, I don't know. No, I don't want to do it.
Yeah. And again, it's just the good thing is, of course, you can just reverse it easily. And definitely, it's not, if you have a difficult fabric when you're sewing a serger, you know, adjusting the differential feed, it won't solve. I mean, because you can definitely go too high and then you will get like lots of gathers instead. But doing small tweaks, I have found that has helped me a lot, actually. And speaking about, you mentioned the lettuce edge, and you also have, you could do a scallop edge, which is also, again, a curled hem that you sew, I think, a zigzag stitch. And between, so you sew over the edge, so you fold the fabric up once. This is a very narrow seam allowance, maybe a centimeter or less, so it's similar to lettuce. I did show tutorials about this. I've done it a couple of times myself, but I don't have a tutorial about it. But then you get that scallop, which is between the zigzag stitches, you get a rounded shape, and it's really, really pretty. So we could see if we can find some example on this, and I'm sure otherwise that you're already familiar with this method. It can be used for underwear and things like that. You can find it maybe on silk camisoles, but that's also nice. Which is, again, something you do with the sewing machine, and that's one of the few ways to do a narrow hem if you don't want to do the lettuce stitch.
Oh, that's smart. I haven't thought about that. That sounds interesting. And if you don't want to do a regular hem, I mean, there are other designs you can do as well, like adding on a binding, for example, or a cuff or something like that. If it is like a really tricky thin fabric, that could also be an option. So you don't have to do a regular hem if you don't want to.
Yeah, sometimes that's the only solution, to be honest. I mean, no matter how many hacks or how many you experiment with your settings, regardless of if you have a regular sewing machine or a cover stitch machine or an overlock. I mean, some fabrics are simply not meant to be hemmed. I mean, it's not going to be a pleasant experience. So in that case, as you say, Malena, just add a cuff.
Yeah, and if the cuff is
the sleeve or the hem,
yeah, if it's a little bit wider, I would also do like minimum 2 centimeter, 1 inch width. I mean, then it's double folded as well, of course. Making it too narrow, then it's just gonna be flipping out, turning out. And you can try to make the width of the cuff a little bit shorter, not a lot. I mean, when you sew the neckline, the rib should be like 75% of the neckline edge. Here, maybe 95% of the bottom width length. So the cuff is a little bit shorter. Just that when you sew and it's stretched out a little bit, it doesn't become wavy, and it holds in the hem a little bit. Like, I'm not talking a lot shorter now, but just a little bit to hold it in and prevent it from being wavy and stretched out.
Yeah, that's a really good tip. So don't feel bad if you struggle, because it's a common struggle, and just because we are experienced with this stuff doesn't mean that we don't find hemming knits a struggle, because it is. Simply that's a take-home message. I think we should talk about at least another technique that you can use on your sewing machine, which is one of my favorites, but it's best suited for slightly thicker and more stable knits, which is to use the good old blind hemming function on your sewing machine. And that pretty much all sewing machine made in like the last 50 years, I have this stitch. So it's nothing fancy. Usually the presser foot is also included in your toolkit, so if you're not familiar with that, just check your manual. And the blind hem stitch is, as the name hints, is just a stitch that looks invisible on the outside, or almost invisible, because it stitches the regular blind hem stitch. I think it stitches 3 straight rows, and then it do a zigzag stitch, and that zigzag stitch, the trick is to fold the fabric so it just catches a thread on the inside. So for instance, if you're hemming, say, French terry, if you're familiar with French terry, it has loops on the inside, and so you can make the stitch visible by making sure the zigzag stitch just catches one of those thread loops on the inside, so it doesn't really show through. And if you just use matching thread, you make it a little bit of a dot, but you know, it won't really be an issue. So that's something I do a lot. And if you get one of my sewing patterns designed for more stable knits, which is the AV cardigan, which I'm wearing right now, or the Vide knit pants, my latest sewing pattern, there I use blind hem pretty much exclusively. Again, it helps to serge the edges, but that's more of a, as we say, it has benefits, but it's not necessary. So I'm going to hold up now. So if you're watching the video version now, I'm holding up a cardigan that I made from wool fabric. It is double face, so it has a second fabric on the inside. So if you watch the video version now, you can see that on the outside there is no visible stitching whatsoever. And now I pull the fabric and you can see it has plenty of stretch because of the fact that there is a zigzag stitch that will add some stretch. Again, you shouldn't use this as lightweight fabric or super stretchy fabric, but as you can see, no problems whatsoever. And then on the inside, now it's going to be really difficult to see, but the stitch is just sewn on the edge, and then there's tiny zigzag stitch that catches the inside of the fabric every third or fourth stitch. And some sewing machines also have a stretch blind hem stitch, which is 6 small zigzag stitch.
Yeah, I was going to say that there are two different, like for both for woven and for specifically for knitted fabric as well.
Yep. My really old sewing machine doesn't have that option, but I think pretty much all modern sewing machine has it. So yeah. So that's a really good, in my opinion, underutilized. It's also if you do sweater knits and things like that. Again, the blind hem stitch is your best friend. So I'm a big proponent of it, and I will definitely link to some video tutorials that I have on my YouTube channel as well, so you can see that. So that's also an option to explore. So I think in between all the things that we said now, we have the twin needle, we have the zigzag stitch, we have the lettuce stitch, we have the scallop stitch, and we have blind hem stitch. So here and the cuffs, if all other things doesn't work. So you have at least 5 options here, and of course you can use stretch thread as well and see if that helps. So I mean, you can actually achieve quite a lot on a sewing machine, even though we said, oh yeah, it's not the best thing. It's still, you can come a long way if you're just aware of the specific challenges and some of the things that you might encounter.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to also look at ready-to-wear garment. How are they doing it? Because they can have really nice design features as well. For example, you have the hem raw, and then you zigzag on like a strip on the shell fabric as well, like 1 inch to 0.5 centimeters wide strip along the bottom hem line. So it creates like and since it's jersey, the edges are rolling. But since they are like 3 layers, they're like it can create a really nice design feature that as well. And there is also a thing called, I think it is ladder stitch. It is not the blind hem stitch. It is, I think it is sewn with the overlocker with some special settings there. But it basically gives that effect as if you would have a blind stitch. That then those like stitchings, as you said, on thin fabric, it will be visible, but that could also be a feature. That is how the ladder stitch is actually looking. So as long as it's something that is wrong, but as long as it's like wrong enough, then it could actually look quite nice, because it gives like another type of details. Same as, I mean, the letter stitch, it's so stretched out that it actually looks nice. So play around, like you can really play around with the design, and it doesn't have to look one specific way. So don't be afraid to test and mixture and see what's ready to wear garments, how they have done it.
Yeah, such a good point. And I love that you brought up the ladder stitch on the serger as well, because I've seen like really cool like 70s vintage t-shirts in a secondhand shop that has the ladder stitch, and it looks so cool. I mean, it definitely, I would say it doesn't look like a cop-out. It kind of elevates the garment. And I actually also have a t-shirt that I bought I think it was made in the US as well, because that's not very common. But it was a really nice, like, vintage style T-shirt, but made modern, and it also had the ladder stitch for the hem, and I love that look. So I definitely do recommend it, because I think sometimes we tend to encouraging being like neat freaks, and everything needs to be so polished, and it has to be invisible, blah blah blah, but just own it instead. I think that's I love that you bring out this point, Malena, because it can be a way to play around and actually discover,
and it gives a
more
little more
techniques that you were aware of.
So on certain sizes it could actually be a nice details instead.
Absolutely. And I will say now that we have talked just about the hemming on a sewing machine now for almost an hour, so I think we will definitely, as we kind of suspected, that we're going to have to do more than one part of this series about how to hem knits. And we haven't really gone into serger, because you actually have several different options there as well if you have the opportunity to have a cover stitch machine. So stay tuned for more episodes on this topic. But I hope that at least if you listen to this episode, you got like a good overview of why it can be a challenge to hem knits, and if you only have a sewing machine, some of the options, and also we touched a little bit on the other options as well. We're definitely gonna go deeper into that. So don't be afraid to try things. I mean, just do a sample first and practice. Go slow, don't stretch out the fabric. Just try to be really, I think working on your technique, basically, and handling the fabric, all these kind of things are ways to improve the result. I think sometimes we expect it's kind of odd that way, that we expect that the first is going to be like great the first time, and we don't understand that there's so many variables going into, I mean, for knits in particular, like fabric weight and stretch and materials. So this is I think hemming knits is a way to really expand your sewing skills and get a much deeper understanding of different type of properties and fabrics and settings and how all these kind of helps each other or causes issues. So I think it's a fun way of learning more about materials. I think it's a good opportunity. So don't be like, I don't want to hem knits. I mean, maybe it's an opportunity to really like expand your sewing skills, I think.
Yeah, and you need to adapt to the fabric. Like you can't force some techniques on all types of fabric. Some you need to change it up depending on the fabric. So don't be afraid. You don't have to do the same thing on every single garment. You can do it differently.
Absolutely. Great final words. And Malena, again, your dress, we will link to that.
Yes.
Tauko Magazine.
Definitely.
Remember to check out both Malena's Instagram is Hazelhen Patterns, and it's linked in the show notes. And also, if you want to get the first early bird offer and learn more about my jeans sewing course, you should definitely sign up to my newsletter on thelaststitch.com. And I'm looking forward to talk more about hemming knits in the future. And we know that lots of you have asked about this stuff, so we definitely feel like this is a topic that we can definitely talk a lot more about in the future episode.
Yeah, and feel free to send us questions if you have any pictures as well. If you have any issues that you want us to help you out with, just reach out, and we hopefully can help you in future episode.
Yeah. So thank you so much for listening. I am Johanna Lundström.
And I am Malena Hjerpe. Bye bye.
Bye bye.